Well, we're into the Gospel of Mark for the next bunch of weeks, right through till Easter. Mark is the Gospel picked for this this season of the narrative lectionary that I preached from the last 4 years or so. Mark is the shortest Gospel and they believe the first of the earliest of the four that have been kept in the Bible. You know, there's lots of other Gospels, but only 4 made the cut politically and theologically. And so of those 4, Mark is the earliest, and that you see other shades of Mark in other of Matthew and Luke. You see stories and phrases taken from Mark because he was that gospel was the one written so early. It's a short gospel, and it starts off with a real pop. There's no birth narrative. That's why we didn't read from it on Christmas Eve. There's nothing about a baby Jesus. Nothing about shepherds, nothing about wise men, donkeys, none of that kerfuffle. Mark is too straight for that kind of stuff. He wants to jump right in. So it starts with John the Baptist. And John the Baptist is raging in the wilderness, locusts and honey and camel hair and all that stuff. And Jesus comes to get baptized. And then Jesus is driven by the Spirit right into the wilderness. And it doesn't even land on what all the temptations were. It just, Mark, no fuss, just says, was tempted in the desert by Satan, and then fed and tended to by the angels, and lived with the wild animals. That's it. Tempted, lived with wild animals, tended to by angels. Back out of the wilderness into our reading today. He calls some disciples in the middle. He goes by the lake, and he calls Peter and Andrew and James and John. And so he's got some disciples. And we consider this text the beginning of his public ministry, is what they call it. Mark chapter 1, starting at verse 21. And it starts off with a real pop. He goes into the synagogue and gets yelled at by a demonic force. Gotta love it. Right away. Right down to business. Jesus grappling with the evil in the world. I love what the demon yells out. It always has struck me ever since I was a little kid. And so could you just take yourself a minute and imagine how Hollywood would do this? It's great movie making in Mark. What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Seethes the demonic power. What have you to do with us? Have you come to destroy us? So Jesus, not necessarily minding his own business, but just walking in a synagogue, no triumphal entry, nobody has said they know who he is, gets named first, called out, so to speak, by this demonic force inside a human being. What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? And when names are used, it's a way of grabbing power. Jesus instantly turns on his heel and says, get out of him, move along, and out. And it says, with convulsing and screaming, the demon comes out of the man and makes his way away from them. It's a good scene. We could just stop on that one for the second Sunday of Christmas. The convulsing, first of all, the calling out is important because it's Mark saying that this is not a one-time event. Because the demon is involved and says, what have you to do with us? And have you come to destroy us, all evil? You understand that this isn't just one moment in time. Although the act of exorcising the demon is very intimate between Jesus and another person, it isn't just a personal, intimate act, but a social act. Immediately, because Jesus is wrestling visibly with the evil in the world and is called out for it, you understand that this is going to be part of his program, part of his ministry in the world, is to challenge evil constantly. Have you come to destroy us? And it just kind of is left hanging. And then it says, with convulsing and screaming. It's got to keep that in mind. Mark doesn't use words for nothing. Convulsing and screaming. It's a good image of what it looks like when evil is thrown out, when evil is sucked from a wound, when evil is pushed aside by the powers of light and life. And we can imagine ourselves and the evils of this world, the things that are hard to let go of, the temptations we fall into, how hard they are to give up, and they cause sometimes convulsing and screaming inwardly or outwardly when Jesus comes glowing into our lives. There's that little lesson right there. convulsing and screaming. It speaks of the turmoil that Jesus has come to bring. Mark wants to get right to it. Immediately following this, the scribes and Pharisees, the leaders of the synagogue, say, "Whoa, what is this? A new teaching?" So I always found that, teaching just hung right off the page. A new teaching. He didn't say, is this some new action? Is this some new healing? Is this some new power? No, they say, what is this? Some new teaching that comes as one who has authority. Teaching with authority. He's been authorized, they think, by God to do this kind of teaching. I think, well, he's just done an exorcism. It really wasn't what I'd call a teaching. So it sort of hangs. What is the teaching that Jesus has come to give with new authority? Could it be healing? Is that the teaching? Because the rest of the stories in this reading are all about healing. And I'm mindful of Christmas Eve when I noticed for the very first time in the hymn, what is it, Hark the Herald, I think, risen with healing in his wings. Little baby Jesus rising up with wings. Could you imagine? Risen with healing in his wings. Right? That's sort of the melody. So here we are healing again, and I'm just mindful of this Christmas imagery of this, the one coming in the manger being like an angel with wings that has healing in the wings. Imagine just like all the imagery of like the dust of the wings or the feathers that fall that have healing, or the wind that's made by the flapping of angelic wings that might come with healing. Is that the new teaching? The teaching that comes with authority? Well, like in other Gospels, Mark reminds us that Jesus' teaching is consistently, his teaching and his power are consistently placed in service to the margins, to those on the edges. Because immediately following this, Jesus goes and he doesn't go. He stays right where he is, and a leper comes to him. A leper approaches him, unheard of. Lepers had colonies outside of town. They were to stay in those colonies so everybody knew where they were, and they didn't touch them, and they wore sackcloth, and they were outcasts, and they were nobodies, and they were forgotten, and they were unnamed. Leper comes into town, makes a beeline, we'd say, straight to Jesus, asks for healing, and Jesus gives him what he's asked for. Healing and blessing. I can't tell you how disturbing this would have been to the people. You could imagine that the leper coming to the doors and everybody just parting, like they can't get close enough to the walls to stay away from this germy, outcast, forgotten person. Maybe some of them were whispering, is that Jacob? I thought it looks sort of like Jacob. It's so disformed, I don't know who it is. Oh, I think it's Jacob, Zechariah's son. And you can hear them whispering. In comes this leper, and Jesus heals him with love. It's a story of more than the intimate healing of one person. Because for the leper to come, and for Jesus, and it says laid hands on him. What? Jesus laid hands on him. A devout Jewish man touched an unclean person. There is a boundary crossing there that is hard for us to even explain in modern Christian faith. Imagine a person who's been outcast and not just outcast socially, but outcast for medical reasons. And Jesus just grabs a hold of them, risking his own life, risking contagion, and risking himself to become an outcast. Jesus risks the authority they just spoke of. And he shows immediately he could give all that up because he comes with a different kind of authority. And he touches this leper, and he crosses that cultural, theological belief system, stuff that was so rooted in first century Judaism. And he touches this leper and heals. And in that, he's also saying, no longer outcast. He says, go down and present yourself to the priest. Tell him what's happened. Meaning, you go down to the priest right away, and you demand to be let back into the community because you're clean. You were outside the community. I've just brought you back into the community, Jesus says. You were untouched. I've just touched you. You had leprosy. Now you're whole. Go down to the priest. Say, I'm back. Be welcomed back into the fold. Be welcomed back into synagogue and at temple in Jerusalem. Jesus risks everything to show the people that a new way, a new teaching, a new kind of authority has come. And in fact, on top of all that, he's saying, nothing this leper has ever done caused his leprosy. You thought he was unforgiven. You thought his parents did something sinful. You thought he had done something sinful and was unrighteous, and that's why he's got leprosy. You think God punished him? No. All of that is wrong, and that was deeply ingrained in the faith systems at that time. He hasn't done anything wrong. Never did. He's forgiven. He's blessed. He's loved. He's welcomed. Such is the grace of God. It's this boundary crossing that the whole passage, all the healings speak of. This is the new teaching, I think, that Jesus has come. A teaching that reaches beyond boundaries. So on the second Sunday of Christmas, I ask us, how is Christmas a boundary crossing? I just got to pause because I'm going to use the word a lot. Boundaries. Talked about a lot in school systems, healthcare, psychology. Boundaries. Keep your personal boundaries, right? Don't let people touch you who shouldn't be touching you. All that stuff. Very important stuff. That's not the kind of boundaries I'm talking about today. In case you had missed that. I'm not talking about your personal, intimate boundaries. Got to hold on to those. Talking about social boundaries. Talking about theological boundaries, belief boundaries, status quo boundaries, political boundaries. How is Christmas a boundary crossing? Good comes to us. God comes to us. A boundary that had never been broken before. A God who had been unseen forever approaches us as a little baby, and that boundary between humanity and God disappears. Christmas is the great boundary crossing. Our God reaching into our very lives, the most intimate of our experiences, and saying, I'm here. I want to be in relationship. I want a new way. Let's go. And the table. How does the table speak of boundary crossing? I don't know how many of you think about communion when we're not having it. But it's one of those really unique experiences. Not many people come to the table anymore. In this society, it's a rare treat and a rare thing to stop and actually be sacred. We kind of get ourselves prepared for communion. We get our communion faces on. They're usually quite serious. Because we believe and know something special is available when we come to the table together. We cross the boundary from ordinary to holy. We cross the boundary from ignoring to paying attention to what God has for us. Christmas is a boundary crossing. The table is a boundary crossing. How could us celebrating today, Christmas and the table, help us cross boundaries that need to be broken down with our God and with our world? At this table, we first meet our God. We cross the boundary. We meet our God and then are called to move across other boundaries in our world. Social boundaries. People who have been outcast. People who have been hurt. People who remain nameless to us or even faceless to us. We are called at this table by our Christmas God to move beyond our comfort, maybe some convulsing, maybe some screaming, but to move past our comfort into the uncomfortable, holy spaces that we'd forgotten about. To move to the holiness of service, the holiness of compassion, the holiness of grace and generosity and hospitality in the world. When thinking about boundaries, I was thinking about fences and walls, and it reminded me of this great story. You may remember me telling you this many years ago. Because you memorize everything that I say. The story of the World War II platoon, the comrades in arms who lose a friend in battle, and they're about to move out the next day. And they think, we got to get him buried. We got to get him buried soon. So they go to the nearest church. And they knock on the door and they say to the priest, it was a Roman Catholic church, and they say, we need to bury our friend. Can we use your cemetery? And the priest says, well, was he baptized Roman Catholic? They said, no, we think he's a Protestant. And the Catholic priest says, I'm sorry, we can't bury him inside the cemetery, but we could put him just outside the fence if you want, because I understand your need. But the rules of the church keep me from burying him inside with the rest of the Catholics. So the comrades go, priest shows them a place outside the fence, and they dig the hole, and they bury their brother. And go away for the night. And just before they move out the next day, they say, we're going to go by and just say one more prayer and see our friend and say our goodbyes. And you know what they discover? The priest in the middle of the night had come and moved the fence. The priest had come and rebuilt the fence so that the cemetery boundaries were now around their comrade. A change of heart, a crossing of boundaries, God's grace winning out. The Gospel of Mark cries to us of a Jesus who crosses boundaries. Not a Jesus that's comfortable. Not a Jesus that looks great and comfortable and easy in the United Church of Canada. Not a Jesus that would fit in North American society with its status quo, its ignorance, its apathy. The Gospel of Mark cries out with a Jesus who crosses boundaries, and they are uncomfortable. But the crossing is so important. This week we may remember our Christmas God, the God of our Thanksgiving table, the God of the Gospel of Mark, and the God of our Christ Jesus, who calls us to move fences, who calls us to break down walls, to speak truth, and to love like never before. May it be so. Amen.